If you're looking to stay informed with the latest analysis on the stories that are shaping our world in the areas of foreign policy, national security, and domestic politics, consider becoming a member of the DSR Network. With the DSR Network podcasts, stay ahead of the curve on global affairs. Each episode across our more than 10 shows features top experts, policymakers, and thought leaders who break down complex issues into digestible, engaging conversations. From breaking news to historical context, we cover the latest topics that matter most. Whether it's the intricacies of international diplomacy, the latest in national security strategies, or the dynamics of U.S. politics, the DSR Network has you covered. Members receive an ad-free listening experience, bonus content for virtually all of our shows, an invitation to join the DSR Slack community, enhanced show notes for select podcasts, and much more. Visit thedsrnetwork.com/buy and enter code JULY2024 to receive 50% off the regular membership price for the first year or first month. That's thedsrnetwork.com/buy and code JULY2024. Thank you very much for your support.
This is the Daily Blast from the New Republic, produced and presented by the DSR Network. I'm your host, Greg Sargent. This week, the news broke that JD Vance, who is Donald Trump's pick as running mate, repeatedly suggested in 2016 that he believed Trump committed sexual assault. Vance has since softened his views, of course, but in a critical way, this captures something really essential about him. He knows exactly what he has now attached himself to in Trump, but he sees Trump as a vehicle to accomplish some really radical societal transformations. The tech writer Gil Duran has a good piece in the New Republic digging deep into the right-wing worldview that animates Vance, which is often called Techno-authoritarianism. So we're chatting with Gil today about what Vance's evolution from clear-eyed Trump critic to Trump's partner in MAGA crime says about today's red-pilled right and our politics more generally. Good to have you on, Gil.
Thanks for having me.
In October 2016, when the Access Hollywood tape surfaced, with Trump making all kinds of lewd comments, Vance tweeted, quote, "What percentage of the American population has Donald Trump sexually assaulted?" Vance also commented on another woman who had accused Trump of groping her in the 1970s, saying, "Do you believe Donald Trump, who always tells the truth? Just kidding. Or do you believe that woman?" So he clearly believed the woman. Since then, Vance has come around to Trump, saying in 2023 that he has gotten to know Trump and believes him. Social media is going nuts about this, Gil, and I think for good reason. Vance was right about Trump, and he's now burying that. How do you read all this?
I think JD Vance is someone who will do or say anything to get what he wants. And what he wants is power. And when it was to his advantage to be selling his book and appearing to be a normal, rational person who might appeal to audiences on both the left and the right, he took one position. And now that it's in his benefit and part of his power quest to become Trump's running mate, he has once again changed his position. So I think Vance is a shapeshifter. I think he'll do anything to get power. I think is a total Machiavellian, and I think that's kind of the explanation for it.
It's a really interesting point. Back when he was selling Hillbilly Elegy, and we should remind people that that book for a lot of liberals was kind of a decoder ring for Appalachia, blue-collar white America. I mean, I don't think it should be a decoder ring, but a lot of people saw it that way. In those days, yes, he really wanted to appear to be a serious literary figure who could actually bridge divides, right? I mean, you know, he was actually, in some senses, a somewhat admirable figure in those days, don't you think?
Yeah, the vibe I remember getting from him, I didn't read his book, but I read a lot about his book, and I know it was sort of a cultural phenomenon, was not that he's this right-wing guy who's going to be standing with Trump in a few years and parroting whatever Trump wants him to parrot. It was not the idea you got. He was sold as this very different sort of character, and he really sort of rolled those East Coast rubes with his tail, which got him to be, got him some cachet, some gravitas, got him to the Senate. So I think that, now we're seeing this complete transformation. We don't know who Vance really is, except that he'll do and say anything to get to the top.
Yeah, and some might dismiss the importance of all these JD Vance quotes from way back when, because they are years old, and I should remind people there are a lot of them. Vance said at the time that he was a never-Trumper, that Trump might be America's Hitler, and that Trump was leading the white working class to a very dark place. Now, I think this is important, not just as a gotcha, but because it shows that Vance once fully understood that Trumpism and MAGA are fundamentally toxic, destructive forces in American life. But now he's come to accept many of the tenets of Trumpism and MAGA. You looked at Vance's evolution. Can you describe the evolution to becoming a real Trumpist and MAGA type?
Sure. Obviously he grew up in this hard scrabble story in Ohio and Kentucky, where actually I also spent many years in Kentucky and have a lot of family there. So it's an area I'm very familiar with. From there, he goes to Yale Law School, sort of has this story as a guy who comes from a blue-collar, white, working-class background, gets into Yale Law, at least on the first years of scholarship. And at Yale Law, he studies the law, and at one point, Peter Thiel, the venture capitalist and tech billionaire, gives a speech in which he says that people who are smart shouldn't be in institutions like Yale studying law. They should be in Silicon Valley. But what Vance does is he gets out of law school. He clerks. He does law for less than 2 years. And then he moves to San Francisco to become a venture capitalist, or to work in venture capital. And he's in California for a couple of years working in venture capital, decides to go back to Ohio, and then he decides to run for Senate out of that.
Okay, so that brings us close to the present. You talked about Peter Thiel's influence on Vance, but there's another character that you talk about in your piece, Curtis Yarvin. Now, listeners may not know him. He's basically a Caesarist and a reactionary, right? Who is Yarvin? How did Yarvin come into Vance's orbit, and what has Vance absorbed from him?
Well, Curtis Yarvin is a former software programmer who became a popular blogger among some on the far right in the neo-reactionary movement in the early 2000s. His basic beliefs are that democracy should be replaced with dictatorships, that countries like the United States should be replaced with smaller corporate-run entities, basically corporate-run company towns. And he has been a very influential thinker with Peter Thiel and people in Peter Thiel's orbit, which some call the Thielverse, for many years. I should also note in one of his early blog posts, Curtis Yarvin suggested that perhaps the underclass should be converted into biodiesel, or else kind of put in permanent solitary confinement and locked up on virtual reality machines so they can no longer trouble the rest of the populace. So Vance, when he hears Thiel speak at Yale Law School in 2011, he emails him a cold email and gets one back from Thiel, who says, come visit me in California sometimes. So a couple of years later, when Vance moves to San Francisco to try to work in tech, as Thiel had advised, he ends up eventually getting a job at Mithril Capital, which was co-founded by Thiel. And apparently during this time in Thiel's orbit, Vance comes into contact with Yarvin, with David Sachs, who's another right-wing Elon Musk Trump-supporting friend, and this becomes his milieu. And when he moves back to Ohio, after having finished writing Hillbilly Elegy while working for Peter Thiel at Mithril Capital, he starts a new fund called Naria Capital and immediately has $90 million of an investment, including contributions from Peter Thiel, from Mark Andreessen, and others in Silicon Valley. So he goes back to Ohio, starts a fund, immediately has money from all these guys. When he runs for Senate, Peter Thiel makes an unprecedented $15 million investment in his campaign, and he wins. He wins with the endorsement of Donald Trump, who Thiel convinced to endorse Vance, even though, as we talked about earlier, Vance had compared him to Hitler, compared him to an opioid. And Vance wins. And now Thiel has spearheaded Trump's decision to pick Vance as his VP.
These guys, what they truly believe is that a kind of natural elite should run things. They fundamentally oppose the idea of self-rule. There's a heavy fascist element to it, I think, also. But they think that this natural elite will rise to the top and should essentially take control. And that's sort of the through line for these guys, isn't it?
Definitely. Yarvin describes it as kind of a return to monarchy, but the idea is that there is a natural order of things. Someone should be the absolute boss with no laws and no checks and balances, and that is the way society would best be governed. And he goes into detail about how that might be accomplished. One idea is that the president of the United States should be given total control of the government, should be able to eliminate civil service or anybody in government who might not be a supporter of the president's party. He believes that the president should be above the law, that he should not answer to the Supreme Court or anyone else. And we've seen some of that coming to fruition in terms of what Vance has talked about since he's become a politician, and what Trump and Project 2025 are talking about in terms of what would happen in the second Trump administration.
Right. This is where the vow to purge the deep state comes in. You need a Caesar-like figure to purge the civil service and the bureaucracy of people who are obstacles to Caesar's agenda. And Vance himself has said that the right should seize control of our institutions, I guess meaning universities, education systems, the media, the culture, and so forth. He has said those institutions need, quote-unquote, de-Bathification and de-wokification, and has argued that Trump should fire every single mid-level bureaucrat and every civil servant in the administrative state and replace them with our people. What is the deeper aim of this? What would that be designed to accomplish?
Well, it's a purge to get professionals out of government, to get free thinkers out of government, and to install a government that will do whatever Donald Trump or his henchmen say. The idea basically is to purge all non-MAGA people from government in the United States, to fold down and destroy and eliminate entire departments of government, in fact, but to use what's left in order to repurpose it as a weapon for conservative right-wing politics and policy. And JD Vance has called it de-Ba'athification or de-Nazification, comparing it to what happened in Iraq when we tried to get Saddam Hussein's people out of government after World War II, when we tried to get the Nazis out of government. And you may recall a few months ago I wrote about Balaji Srinivasan, another Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, David Sachs friend, who talks about the exact same thing, the de-Ba'athification of San Francisco, the de-Nazification of San Francisco. So the basic idea is we take over government, maybe through Donald Trump by getting someone on his ticket, JD Vance, and then working with traditional right-wing conservatives, the Tech-authoritarians, work together on a common goal of getting all the Democrats out of government, including small d Democrats. And Yarvin says specifically small d, people who believe in democracy, get them out of government and basically form a totalitarian, authoritarian government where the president is the king and there's no other authority. And specifically, Yarvin says no checks and balances. Basically, the most anti-American thing you can think of.
I think it's absolutely clear that Vance views Trump as a kind of providentially chosen vehicle to accomplish all these things. Trump is this tremendous political talent who came along without many ideas of his own. He can be kind of hijacked to carry out this de-Bathification of our institutions. I really think there's little doubt that Vance views him that way. Now, your piece describes Trump's 2016 victory as a kind of watershed for authoritarianism in the United States. Looking at all this through these frames that you're offering here, a victory in 2024 would be an entirely different matter. They have this whole de-Bathification agenda worked out now, right?
Definitely. They have 900 pages of plans of what they're going to do to completely remake the United States as an authoritarian right-wing country. And I think, the American people elect fascist dictator is going to be the stupidest headline ever, and let's hope that doesn't happen. But Yeah, these guys are playing for keeps. In fact, one quote that's circulating out there from Vance is that we have to be ruthless in how we use the machine of government once we have it. No more trying to reach across the other side or preserve institutions in a way that they've always been preserved. We will destroy those institutions. We will control those institutions. And through that destruction and control, we will control the country. By destroying institutions, they don't just mean the government while they have it. I think the way our entire government and democracy work, I don't think we get a next election if these guys get into office the way they're talking. Because remember, even when they lose, they say they won. And, if Vance had been the vice president in 2021, he would have not allowed the democracy to function. He would have blocked the vote. We would have had a massive constitutional crisis. And so that's what it will be like next time around.
I do want to pick up on something you just said there about how Vance has essentially said that Mike Pence, who was Trump's vice president on January 6, 2021, should not have counted the electoral votes in Congress. And essentially scuttled the transfer of power. He doesn't quite say it that way, but that's what he means. He says that Mike Pence was wrong in upholding the Constitution and the rule of law and the integrity of our elections. And so I think there's something about Vance's evolution that's lost on a lot of people. He's often sort of described as merely opportunistically moving toward Trump, right? But I think he actually has evolved to accept the tenets of MAGA in a very deep way. He has said here and there that, he opposed Trump before, but Trump showed him that our institutions are deeply corrupt. Now, I don't know if he's ever expanded on that, but what I think he means by that is that, again, Trump is kind of this weirdly providential chosen figure who just kind of, through the force of his charisma and presence, kind of exposed the rot at the core of everything, at the core of liberal democracy and, at the core of our woke institutions and so forth. What do you make of that transition? That is a real belief on Vance's part, right? That Trump kind of exposed the corruption at the core of our whole system?
Definitely. I think Vance is more dangerous than Trump, because Vance has a philosophy. Vance has a specific ideology that believes in dictatorship, that believes in a corporate-run country where the tech oligarchs who have put him in this position are the masters of society and the masters of the world. And I think Trump is more just a kind of a guy who's a massive narcissist who's into himself. It's all about him. But I think they see this as a way, as a vehicle to get their guy in there and to be the inheritor of this movement, and to use their billions and billions and billions of dollars over the next few years, not to mention AI and any other technologies they can put to the cause, like, for instance, Twitter, to push the country into chaos and into far-right politics and to basically capture that power to the greatest degree possible. And I think Vance is willing to be that person. I think he believes he's the one for that. Fortunately, he's not that great. He's not that charismatic. And he's being tested now in a way I think that he hasn't been before. And we're starting to uncover some of his bizarre leanings. And, as people have been saying on Twitter, if there's one thing we know, it's that Trump's going to turn on him at some point. Today there's a new poll showing Kamala Harris 2 points ahead. Well, that has to be JD Vance's fault, right? So, because it's not going to be Trump's. And Vance has accepted this job as second banana to a very hierarchical leader. And he's going to have to really dance in order to stay in there and not end up at the short end of the stick. But the payoff, if he wins, is enormous. And I think that Elon Musk and Peter Thiel and Mark Andreessen and all of these tech oligarchs are making a bet as they would on a startup. That's what basically JD Vance is, a techno-authoritarian startup project. And if they can scale him, we are screwed. So we can't allow that.
Very well put. To return to Vance and these quotes about Trump, Vance is supposed to be a devout Catholic. He converted and so forth. He clearly thinks of himself as a deeply virtuous person. He thinks of his right-wing populist authoritarian politics as kind of inculcating virtue. And he clearly sees his political enemies as corrupt and decadent. So in the end, I mean, isn't the story here that Vance is hitching himself to Trump in the full knowledge of who he is, morally and spiritually, as he said back in 2016, but seeing him as an agent now to carry out this larger transformation? I think in a sense, that's the true MAGA right there, isn't it?
Oh, definitely. I mean, that's why evangelicals have embraced Trump, because they know he's imperfect, they know he's flawed, but they see him as this divine tool or weapon that has beaten the Democrats and has achieved a lot of their agenda just by being where he is and installing those people. So I wouldn't take his religion any more seriously than I would take his supposed hatred of Donald Trump in 2016. I think he has just constructed himself to be what he thinks he needs to be to get to where he's going. I saw that he's changed his name 4 times in the past 10 years, been called many different things, James Hamill, JD Vance, you name it. So this is a guy who is a shapeshifter, and he's after power, and he's working for some very wealthy people who have a very detailed plan for what they want to do with that power if they can get it. So, again, any part of his image, down to his, there's questions about whether he wears guy liner. Everything is constructed to get him to where he wants to go. He's not a real person, I think, at this point. He is a creation, and he is largely a creation of Peter Thiel.
Gil Duran, thanks so much for coming on with us today.
Thanks for having me.
You've been listening to The Daily Blast with me, your host, Greg Sargent. The Daily Blast is a New Republic podcast and is produced by Riley Fessler on the DSR Network.